I don't know about you guys, but you know, when we go on holiday, everything kind of goes a little bit pear-shaped, you know? The diet goes a little bit funny, you know, you eat a lot more junk food and a lot more fast food, and there's not so much home cooking, and, you know, just lots of different things. You know, you spend more money, you know, and if the kids come and ask you for things, you're like, oh, of course, yes, why not? Everything is yes and now, you know, and there's no chores, responsibility. I've never gone on holiday and offered to go and clean. You know, Ian's never offered to go and look after the lawn of the hotel or wash the windows of where we're staying. You know, there's no responsibility. Everything is wonderful, you know. There's no alarm clocks go. It's just like, well, when we're waking up, we'll see when breakfast happens, you know. And that's what happens when you're kind of relaxed. And then, you know, when we come back home, it's like, okay, here we go, right? Rein everybody in, bring in the responsibility. Remember, kids, this is what we do. This is a home-cooked meal. No, we're not having fish fingers. No, we're not going to Chinese. And everything, you know, the alarm gets set again. And I kind of see this sermon series a little bit like that. Not that we've all gone on holiday, but, you know, it's really good to revisit the rules and the boundaries and the things that you hold dear to you. And so, with everything, you know, when we come back as a family from holiday, be like, okay, let's set up what we used to do and let's revisit them and let's get all those little boundaries in order. And that's kind of what it's like. And so I wanted to just start off by reading Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 47. And I'm reading from the Passion Translation, and it should be up there. And it's speaking about the very first church, and that's who we're getting these ideas from. This is where we get our pillars, our values from. And I'm just going to read it. Every believer was faithfully devoted to following the teachings of the apostles. Their hearts were mutually linked to one another, sharing communion and coming together regularly for prayer. A deep sense of holy awe swept over everyone, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. All the believers were in fellowship as one body, and they shared with one another whatever they had. Out of generosity, they even sold their assets to distribute the proceeds to those who were in need amongst them. Daily they met together in the temple courts and in one another's homes to celebrate communion. They shared meals together, joyful hearts and tender humility. And it goes on. And so in just that little passage are the 5 values that we really value in this church. The 5 kind of pillars that our foundation is Jesus, but these are kind of the pillars that we build everything else on. Craig so eloquently spoke last week on community. In fact, afterwards I said, look, I've got my notes. Do you want to just rehash them and put your Craig spin on them and do them? Because it was so eloquent. He did it so well. There was community, maturity, generosity, humility, and today I'm going to speak about loyalty. Loyalty is a really interesting thing. It says that they were devoted to themselves. They were devoted to the teachings. They were loyal to each other. Loyalty is, you know, if you look up the dictionary meaning of loyalty, it says staying firm in your friendships and in your support of something, being faithfully devoted. And being loyal is difficult from having a loyalty card. I just want to say that at the beginning. I have loyalty cards in my purse. And, you know, I sometimes pull them out and, you know, I get a little loyalty stamp if I go to Starbucks or whatever, and I get a little stamp, and after so many you get a free coffee or something. But, you know, loyalties are often based on feelings. If you choose to do something, if you're loyal to something, you're going to stay steadfast. But a loyalty to something can change. You know, I really, really liked Starbucks coffee, but when Tesco opened up near my school, I suddenly had a love for Costa, and I never visited Starbucks again. You know, our loyalties change. You know, you'll hear of somebody that's always bought the same brand of car or washing machine, and there's some fault, and it's like, oh, ditch that, I'm going for something else. Or they'll shop in a certain place, and then that's why Lidl's and Aldi have done so well, because people are like, ditch the ones we used to go to. They're the cheapest, and that's where we're going. So our loyalties can change, but our loyalty is something that is steadfast and sure. And the word loyalty and faithfulness, that's why we sung that song, those 2 words are interchangeable in the Bible. It doesn't often speak about the word loyalty, it'll say faithfulness, but that's actually what it is. And it's often, interchanged all the time. And, I've never heard a husband that said, you know what, I'm actually 85% loyal to my wife. Isn't that wonderful? And for 15%, I just have my girlfriend on the side. No, you're either committed or you're not. So if you're messing about, you are not loyal. You cannot, and it's the same with Jesus. We are committed or we are not committed. And that's where you get that Sunday Christians, the people are like, oh, well, on a Sunday, I look good, I do this, I do all these things. But actually, you have to be devoted Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every day of the week. That's what you have to be. And so we're not into Sunday Christianity here. We are into being loyal 24/7. I tried to Google some stories on loyalty, and the sad thing is, the only stories on loyalty are about animals. Animals. We all know about Greyfriars Bobby and the little 2-year-old Skye Terrier that was owned by a guy called John Gray. And he was in Edinburgh, and John Gray died, and the little terrier was there at the funeral and was absolutely distraught. And so the little terrier was just, they shooed the dogs out because it said no dogs. But every day the little dog would come back and lie on his master's grave. And then they changed the rules for this little dog to come, and he would lie there every day. And when the canon would go in Edinburgh for lunchtime, he would go out, and people adopted this little dog and would give him food, and he would get fed, and he would go back. And for 14 years, until he died in 1872, he lay as a loyal, faithful dog. And it's sad that the loyalty stories, but I know there are loyalty stories, but the loyalty stories that Google shared were all about animals. But we know that there's many great stories in the Bible about loyalty. We think of Daniel, Ruth, Joseph, Mary, the mother of Jesus. They were real loyal people. And then there's other stories that are disloyal. You think of Delilah. You think of Joseph's brothers. And then ultimately you think of Judas. And the disloyalty that just was so damaging and so awful. And so I'm going to be speaking about Ruth today, and it was funny because Craig spoke about it last week, but it is a little different side to it. And we're going to be looking at Ruth. And just before we open up the book of Ruth, the last verse, one of the last verses in the book of Judges says, in those days, Israel had no king, and everybody did as they saw fit. And that's where we open up the story today. We're opening up into a world there that everybody did what they wanted to do. There was not much loyalty going on. A little bit like today, whatever goes. If it feels good, do it. And so that's kind of that's where the story opens up. And it opens up in the book of Ruth, and you have this little family in Bethlehem, and there's a husband, a wife, and 2 sons, and famine is in the land. And the book starts off with disloyalty. They're in the promised land, they're in Bethlehem, they're with their friends, their relatives, their people, but there's a little bit of famine in the land. And so what ends up happening is this family, for whatever reason, decide that they're not going to trust God in this situation. I know he's faithful. I know he's been faithful, but we're going to fix our own problem. How many of us are like that? We trust God so far, and then we take the reins back and say, okay, thanks, you've done a great job, but I'm in charge now. And so this little family, for whatever reasons, decides to leave Bethlehem and actually goes on this journey to Moab. And Moab is actually the place that they were warned not to go to. It was where the enemies were. And they go there. And you know what? I want to say to you, there are consequences to compromise. And if you've made decisions in your life for certain things, don't compromise for anything, even for a famine, because God will sustain you in the famine. Because when we see the story at the end, Naomi comes back alone, but Naomi comes back, all of her friends were there, her family were there, her relatives were there. They never moved, but this family didn't trust a loyal and faithful God. And so he, when she comes back, when Naomi finally does decide to come back, she is quite bitter with herself. She's gone away. Everything bad has happened to her. She's lost her husband. Her sons have compromised. They've married the Moabite girls. And now the sons, and they've become very ill, and they have now died. And she finds herself thinking, what's happened. And I scribbled this verse down. I don't have it there, but I just scribbled it down. She says to her daughter-in-laws, I mean, some witness this is, I left full. I left a life that was full, and God is bringing me back with nothing. The strong God has ruined me. How many times in our Christian world, and this is a challenge for all of us, when we make decisions, when we take those reins back, when we decide to do our own things, we're not willing to take responsibility for what has gone wrong. We actually are the ones that are saying, well, actually, it's all God's fault. It's his problem. And we get annoyed about it. But anyways, that's what happens there. And so I'm just going to start with the key verse. We see Naomi, she has decided that she is going to head back to Bethlehem, and she just kind of says to the daughter-in-laws, we're going to head back. I'm going to go back. And they're like, no, we want to go with you. Naomi is going back, not because she's had a text or a phone call. She is going back. I know she knows that the famine isn't there anymore, but she is going back because deep, deep down, she knows that there is a God, a loyal God, who is a God of the second chances. He's a God who heals. He's a God who restores. And she's starting to stir up that faith again, thinking, and maybe it was her husband, I think. It was her husband that made the decision to go there. So maybe she thought, he's not here anymore. I can take responsibility and make good choices again. And I think it's just wonderful to know that God never leaves us, even in our bad choices, even in our walks down the wrong paths. He never leaves us. He is always loyal, and he always is there to restore us. So I'm just going to pick up these two verses, and then we'll get started. I'm just watching the time. Okay, verse 16 to verse 18. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, even if death separates you from me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was serious, she didn't urge her anymore. And this is when, I don't want to go through all the story with you, but when Naomi goes back, the girls decide to go as well. And I just think it's amazing. These girls have never, ever read the Torah. They've never been to a synagogue. They've never been to a connect group. But they have watched Naomi's life. And even though she has gone to Moab and is there, I believe, I have an imagination. I like to imagine that when they were kneading bread, Ruth would say things like, tell me about your people. What was life back there? And Naomi would start telling her about the faithful God and the stories of the Red Sea and all these things. And I think those girls were on a journey, and they were like, wow, we're coming with you. We're not leaving you. And that's why Ruth just comes out and says, I don't care what you say, but I am definitely going with you. So the first point I wanted to make was loyalty determines our mobility. And if we choose to do something, we will make efforts and we will be mobile. If you make bad choices, like they made a bad choice, we don't trust God, and they moved to Moab. You can make bad choices in your life, and don't tell me that you turn up in a place and go, oh, how did I get here? Little compromises are made all the time. So loyalty determines our mobility. And in verse 16, where you go, I will go. And I just like to think that on this road to Bethlehem, there's Naomi here, and Orpah has already made a choice. What? I don't know if I can risk that much. I don't know if I can make that decision. So I love you guys, but I'm heading back to Moab. And so we now have Naomi and Ruth walking together. And I can imagine them walking and talking. And I thought to myself, because of the walk Naomi made, because of the walk that Ruth made with her, many, many years later, there was a beautiful girl called Mary who was 9 months pregnant, also walked that walk, also walked on that journey to Bethlehem, into the unknown, into what is going to happen. I've never seen this. My husband, my fiance's never seen me before, but he's going to be the midwife at my birth. Can you imagine what that was like? And she walked that same walk back to Bethlehem. And I just think, it's a faithfulness that one generation sows into the next generation, sows into the next generation. And I just like to see that image, and I can imagine, the Lord looking from heaven going, yep, you've made the right choice. I've got it all planned out. You don't know what's ahead of you. And so they go, and the two girls go together. I like the fact, Mary, not Mary, sorry, wrong sermon. Ruth decided that she was going with Naomi. And Ruth didn't get to check out a website to see what the church was like. She didn't get to listen to the podcast. She didn't get to check things out or go on a little mission trip to figure out if she would like Bethlehem. She just went, and there was no turning back. That was a road she was never going to be able to walk again. So she decided and went with it, And I just wanted to say, many, many people will show an affection towards Jesus. Many people love Jesus and think the word and think he's great. And they show an affection towards Jesus and his church. But they will never wholeheartedly follow him because there are things they cannot leave behind. And when Ruth went, she was burning all of her bridges. There was no going back. Orpha, she was like, you know what? Yeah, I need to go back. And I understand. If I put your hands up, I think we would all be like, yes, I'm Ruth. But you know what? I often wonder, I think I might have been Orpha. I don't know, would I have had the courage? Would I have been able to say goodbye to my family and that? I don't know. I would like to think I was Ruth, but I don't want to be so, arrogant in that area. And so with Ruth, it was she demonstrated her loyalty by moving and by action. And it meant sacrifice. There was nothing else that was going to happen. It was all or nothing. And the Bible speaks about serving two masters. You either serve one or you serve the other, but you cannot serve both. And I think in that decision, Orpha was like, you know what? I'm going back. And Ruth was like, no, I'm burning my bridges. I'm going ahead, and I'm doing that. And I wanted to apply this to our church here, at King's Community Church here. We want to be loyal to the church. We want to be loyal to God. We want to be loyal to his final commission. In Matthew 28:19-20, it says, now go in my authority and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to faithfully follow all I've commanded you. And never forget that I'm with you to the end of the age. And something, I just think, we wonder what loyalty is. Loyalty is like, we are planted here. We have moved here. This is where we are. And this is the final commission. We have a city to reach. We have neighbors to talk to. We have friends to bring along to. We have people on this journey. And we will be loyal to the final commission in this church. The second thing about loyalty is loyalty defines our location. It says that Abraham stepped out in faith and went to a land that he didn't know of. I remember hearing stories about missionaries many, many years ago. When they left, it said, I don't know if it's true or not, but they said that they took their coffins with them because they were going to the mission field and they knew that they would be buried in the mission field. There was no turning back. There wasn't, let's go on a little mission trip. Let's just check it out. Let's go for a few months and go back for a sabbatical and whatever. It was do or die. And so I think loyalty defines our location. And, she says here, where you stay, I will stay. And where you die, I will die. And, this term, butterfly Christians, if you've ever watched a butterfly, it lands in a pretty flower, stays for a while, and you go along with your phone to take a picture of this beautiful thing, and it flits off to another plant. And they never stay still. They're always floating around. And you know what? Let's be planted in this location. Because loyalty is planted in a location. And I know if there's things, when things get tough, you think, oh, stick in there. Stick in there and stand. Where you stay, I will stay. We've got so many things like comparethemarket.com. No, it's not comparethechurch.com. We'll go here for a little while. We'll check this out. Oh, it doesn't do the kids' work. We'll go somewhere else to see if the youth work works or whatever. You have to find what suits you. And I do know that there are people, and I've been in this situation myself, where we just felt stirred to be moved. And that's a very different thing than visiting many churches and not ever being a part, never tithing to a church because you're moving around, never serving in a church because you're moving around. So if you come, and if you're a student and you're only here for a small time in a small location, just get stuck in. And get involved and do things, because that's what loyalty is. And that's what loyalty was. Loyalty trusts a God, and loyalty accepts the location that they're in and think, yep, this is me, this is who I am. And, you know, we were at a wedding last week of Matthew and Claire. Seriously, I had a moment there. Okay, Matthew and Claire, we were at their wedding. And when I listened to the vows, it didn't say for better, and if you're wealthy, and if you're healthy, and until I feel like it, I'm going to stick with you. No, it was for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. You know, that's what loyalty is. It's not a feel-good thing. It's not, well, if it feels good, or if the circumstances are right, or if this is okay, or if it provides my certain coffee, or, oh, I don't like the way they've spoken to me, I'm out of here. Loyalty sticks. And so, you know, I just can imagine these two girls, you know, going and, you know, if I had my daughter-in-law Heidi here, I'd be walking with her, and you can imagine the two of them going together. Now, Ruth, you know, people are not going to really like you. They're gonna notice your accent. They're not going to like what you're wearing, you know, and those gods that you've worshipped. And in fact, you know, we might get hate mail. You know, can you imagine? She was preparing her for what was about to happen. It wasn't an easy journey, but Ruth stuck by it. And I don't think Naomi painted a rosy picture. I mean, she's painted a picture of like, my God's failed me. And Ruth is joining her on that journey towards Bethlehem with Naomi, who's declared that her God has failed her. And she's a bitter person. But Ruth has seen something else. She has had a revelation of Jesus, I believe. And that's kind of what sisterhood is. We have sisterhood on a Thursday. It's like sticking with the girls and saying, you know what? In your challenge, I'm with you. If you're wanting, you know, if you're struggling with something, I'm there. If you're, you know, I'm not going to chuck you out because you've flubbed up, if something's happened. We're in this together. And that's what I would say to everyone here. This church will stand with you and support you and help you as much as we can. So if we move on and look at, we go on now here to chapter 2. And it speaks about, and so Naomi was back with Ruth the foreigner. Imagine. She was probably always known as a foreigner. One day, Ruth, the Moabite foreigner, said to Naomi, I'm going to work. I'm going out to glean amongst the sheaves, following after the harvester, and I'm hoping they will treat me kindly. And then it goes on to verse 5. Boaz said, who is this young woman, and where did she come from? The foreman said, oh, why, that's the Moabite girl. You know, she has a name, but she's called the Moabite, the foreigner. Why, that's the Moabite girl, the one who came with Naomi from the country of Moab. She asked permission, let me glean, she said, and gather among the sheaves, following after your harvesters. She's been at it steady ever since, from early morning until now, without so much as a break. And there's two things I want to point out here. How wonderful that Boaz was loyal to the word of God. Because if you look at Leviticus and you look at Deuteronomy, when the Lord is speaking to Moses and says, now remember, this is what I want you to do. When you're harvesting, don't pick up everything. Leave it for the foreigners, for the widows, and for the orphans. So we find Boaz is loyal to the word of God. He's read the word and he says, you know, guys, leave that at the sides. I don't know who's going to come into my fields, but just leave it for them. And he has no idea what's walked into his field. It's amazing. I love that we know the end of the story. And if some of you don't know the story, you know, Ruth ends up marrying Boaz. But here she is. She finds herself gleaning in this field of this foreigner that she doesn't even know about. And the second thing is, Ruth didn't just say, I'm coming with you, Naomi, and we're going to go on this journey together, and we're going to see what happens. She rolled up her sleeves and thought, I'm getting stuck in. Because in that day, you know, if you didn't have a man to provide for you, you had nothing. And so she was like, okay, I'm going to be loyal not just to you, but I'm going to be loyal in my actions as well. And I'm going to go out there. Now, Naomi, what did you say about those fields? And you said something in the Torah about they would leave some stuff for the widows and orphans. Yeah, okay, well, I'm going to go and see if that works. And she went out there, and it happened to be, and I love the way it says, it happened to be. You know, there's no happenings in God's world, you know. And I just love that story. You know, I was talking to a young girl this morning that I had met for coffee a couple of weeks ago, and I said, oh, you know, I was giving her the lowdown of the church and how she could get involved. And she goes, oh, actually, I just came last week. This is just my second week, and I'm actually already on the hospitality team. I'm like, Boom. Amazing. You know, I was talking to a couple last week. Yeah, they've just been coming for a while. Yeah, we're on your team at the Torrey Street Church. I said, oh, really? And I was trying to figure out who their names were, because I remember speaking to them when they first came 6 weeks ago. And there they were serving. They were on the little clip we showed. Isn't that wonderful? You're not just loyal with your words. You're not just loyal because you turn up, but you're loyal with your deeds and your actions. And, you know, I can remember, I've another little story that I wanted to share. You know, there was a young girl came to Aberdeen about 42 years ago from quite a difficult childhood, I think, difficult family, certainly an unsafe family, and moved into Roslyn Terrace. And she was there in Roslyn Terrace and didn't know anything about God, but felt drawn to this church. She doesn't know why. I asked her, she didn't know why, she just felt drawn to this church. She came to this church, there was a few people here, not many people. She came, they loved her, they spoke with her. They were so delighted to see a young, fresh face here. And she said very soon she gave her heart to Jesus. And she said there was such a pull from her friends when she met Christian friends at university. There was such a pull to go to the hip and trendy churches. They were of their time, the student churches. And every time she wanted to go, she thought, but these people have been faithful. They've been really kind to me. And she just stayed there. And you know, 37 years later, you know, her life took her different places. But 37 years later, she came back to visit here 5 years ago. And if you want to put the next slide up, and this is what happened. This is my daughter-in-law, Heidi. Now, it was her mum that came as a student here. Isn't that an amazing story? The great... You don't have to keep the picture up there. But you know, the great, you know, we buy dot-to-dot books for children. And, you know, we have an eternal God who has this great dot-to-dot plan. And he's just joining the dots. He had no idea, we had no idea that when she came here, she had no idea that this church would actually then encourage her to go to Bible school. And she would then go to America. And she would fall in love there and live there all of her time. And then 5 years ago, she decided to bring her daughter back to just visit her homeland because her brother lives in Aberdeen. And I met her in the foyer and she said, you know, we just happened to come here and I just wanted her to see the church where I gave my heart to Jesus. And I said, oh, your daughter, she looks cute. I've been praying for someone like her for 20 years. And, you know, and then Heidi stayed on and the rest is history. She fell in love with Daniel. And, you know, Heidi said, it was funny, she said, before we came, we sat down, my mom and dad and I, and we sat down at the kitchen table and listened to a podcast, listened to Ian and wondered what the church was like, and I'd seen some in the media. And in his sermon, he mentioned 4 daughters. She said, he never mentioned his son. I said, oh, he has a son. Let me introduce you. So I just think it's wonderful. You know, if you're faithful to your location, if you're faithful to what God gives you in your hand, he will come through. I was thinking this morning, you know, as I'd been preparing this, you know, my dad had left a very large church and was preparing sermons. And, you know, he took as much time preparing the sermons for the 10 people gathered downstairs in the Sunday school room as he did for a large church. And, you know, it's the faithfulness in preparing those sermons, the faithfulness in coming, the faithfulness in giving that God actually, you know, honors. And you know, and all I would say to you guys here is, you know, when you come to KCC and the honeymoon's over and you're not the new kid on the block and everyone's like, oh, you're just so-and-so, or you come up against things and things are a bit difficult, press in and remember, you serve a God who's loyal to you. You serve a God who is the best. And the last point I want to talk about was loyalty transforms your identity, and it transforms our identity and secures our future. And it's quite amazing, isn't it, that you have this whole thing that, you know, Pat comes here, just an unsaved young student, and many years later, God joins the whole dots together. You know, we served with my mum and dad in this church. We just came along to help in Sunday school, and Ian will help with the worship. You know, we never, ever thought, I was going to say in our wildest dreams, my head's saying my wildest nightmare. No, I'm just kidding. We never thought in our wildest dreams that we would be pastoring this church one day. I mean, Ian was a doctor. That wasn't in our dreams, but it's all in his plans, how he joins all the dots, you know? And here's Ruth. She just so happens to walk into this man's field. This isn't some happening. This is God ordained. And when you are loyal to God and you stick with him, he will always stick with you. And he will show you how he's weaving it all together. And here she walks into this field and Boaz says, oh no, I'll take care of you. I'll look after you. And he becomes her kinsman redeemer. He becomes her husband. And there she is. She probably thought she would never, ever be a mum. Maybe she had prayed for children and God hadn't answered her. I had a thought earlier that if God had answered her and she'd had children, maybe she would have never left Moab. But he didn't answer her because God had a different plan. And I often think, you know, it took Ruth to make that decision to get devoted, to walk on that path to Bethlehem. And, you know, many, many, many years later, there would be another little young girl walking on that road to Bethlehem. You know, Mary and Joseph, they went, she was heavily pregnant, and she made that journey also to Bethlehem. And I just think it's so amazing. If Ruth hadn't made her journey to Bethlehem, if she had got scared, and if she had walked away and thought, no, I can't fully trust God, then Mary's story would have been very different. But God had it all planned. And you know, Ruth married Boaz, and they had a little boy called Obed. Obed went on and had Jesse. Jesse went on and had King David. And Ruth's name is written into the genealogy of Jesus. You know, Jesus' genealogy isn't full of perfect people. It isn't full of professors and great theologians. It's full of people like Ruth. It's full of people like Rahab. It's full of people like you, not you and me, but people like us that were just ordinary people that had a revelation of who Jesus was and that thought, you know what, I'm going to be loyal. And you know, there was we had just come back from the Hillsong conference, and it was a song we sung there, and I'm sure we'll be singing it here soon. And it said, I will praise him on the mountain, and I will praise him when the mountain is in my way. And it's learning to be loyal in the good and in the bad, in the hard seasons and in the happy seasons, in those lonely years, in those barren years, and in those fruitful years, because he never leaves us. He's faithful to us. And I just wanted to end, you know, with one. I'll just summarize it up here. You know, loyalty requires mobility and us nailing our colors to the mast. Loyalty gives us contentment in our location. We're here and we're like, you know what? This is where he's planted me, and I'm going to bloom where I'm planted. Loyalty does transform our identity. You know, I am who he says I am. And loyalty does indeed transform our future. You know, all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I have, I will sing of the goodness of God. And you know, I'm just going to end it there because our time is gone. But you know, there was a story of a man in the 1990s, and he was running this amazingly successful Bible school. And his wife had become very unwell, and she was starting to show signs of Alzheimer's and was gradually getting worse. And he writes in his letter, writes in his resignation letter, and he says, you know, my dear wife Muriel has been failing mentally for quite a few years now, about 8 years. And so far, I have been able to hold this responsibility of being a president of this big Bible school and also looking after my wife. But recently it's become very apparent that my dear wife Muriel is contented most of the time when she is with me. But when I am not there, she is confused and hurt and upset. And so I've now taken the decision to write out my resignation letter. And people came alongside him and said, you know, are you sure, you know, we could get carers in? And he says, no, he says, I made this decision 42 years ago when I stood and I gave the vows to her in sickness and in health. And, you know, until death do us part. He says, so she's been faithful to me as a wife when she was able to be faithful. She was loyal to me for many, many years. And this is my turn to show a great example to the students that I serve in this Bible school, that loyalty is huge, that loyalty sometimes demands a really brave decision. It demands something that is beyond us. And so he resigned from his post to care for his wife. And that's what loyalty is. You know, being loyal to this church, being loyal to the bride of Christ, being loyal to Jesus isn't a duty that we go, oh my goodness, we need to be loyal. It's our privilege. We get to do this. He's loyal to us. We get to do it. We get to be loyal to him. It's our privilege to love him, to serve him, and to be faithfully devoted to him. And you know, if you're here today and you're thinking, you know, I maybe haven't been as loyal as I should have been with my finances, or I haven't been so loyal with the gifts I have, I'm sitting on some talents, or I haven't been as loyal in attending the services, I kind of go if the weather suits me. Can I just say to you, we serve a Jesus who was loyal in every situation, and whatever good or bad decisions we make, he is loyal. And it's our privilege to just give a little bit of that loyalty back to him. Okay? So we're just going to close with this wonderful song and just sing it out, and just rededicate, as you sing it, rededicate your commitment to loyalty to Jesus and to his bride. Thank you.